The Battle of the Little Bighorn, fought on June 25, 1876, remains one of the most significant and controversial moments in American history. Known for the overwhelming defeat of General George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry, this clash symbolizes the fierce resistance of Native American tribes against U.S. expansion. Custer, under orders from General Alfred H. Terry, set out to locate and confront a large group of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors camped along the Little Bighorn River. Despite strategic intentions and the courage displayed by many, the battle ultimately turned into a tragedy for Custer and his men. This narrative revisits the key events leading to the battle, the critical moments during the engagement, and the complex dynamics that unfolded between Custer's forces and their Native American adversaries. The defeat of General Custer and the 7th Cavalry on June 25, 1876, marked one of the most dramatic battles of the Western Indian Wars, resulting in 265 men killed and 52 wounded. Acting under the orders of General Alfred H. Terry, who commanded the Department of Dakota, General Custer departed from the mouth of the Rosebud River in Montana on a scouting mission to locate a group of Native Americans suspected to be camped to the south, possibly along the Little Bighorn River. The trail leading up the Rosebud River had been identified several days prior, and by June 22nd, nearly the entire 7th Cavalry, consisting of about 700 soldiers and 28 officers, had set out from camp to follow this path. Although the story has been recounted numerous times, only a brief outline is necessary here. From a vantage point on the ridge between the Rosebud and Little Bighorn rivers, General Custer's scouts pinpointed the Indian village's location. Near Reno Creek, close to the Little Bighorn, Custer divided his forces into 3 battalions. He ordered Major Reno, leading 3 cavalry troops and scouts, to advance to a location above the uppermost part of the village along the Little Bighorn. Captain Benteen, with another 3 troops, was tasked with scouting to the left and southward toward the river, with instructions to engage any Indians encountered. Meanwhile, Custer planned to lead a direct assault on the village farther down the river. His scouts had cautioned him that the village was extensive and the outcome of an engagement would be highly uncertain. Near the point where Custer and Reno parted ways, Reno crossed the river and soon attacked the upper village. Upon seeing the vast size of the camp, he became apprehensive about continuing the assault and withdrew into a wooded area. However, his stay there was brief, as panic quickly set in, prompting him to abandon the timbered position, cross the Little Bighorn River, and seek refuge on the high bluffs along the northern side. Here, he established defensive entrenchments. Shortly afterward, Benteen joined him, followed by Captain McDougal and the pack train. Meanwhile, Custer approached the lower part of the expansive camp where the Cheyennes, Brules, and Ogalallas were situated. Instead of crossing the river and charging into the village, he paused and took up a position on a long, elevated ridge. Following a battle that lasted no more than 2 to 3 hours, his entire command was overwhelmed and killed. General E.S. Godfrey, retired, who served as a lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry, accompanied Benteen and Reno. In 1892, he provided a detailed account of these events in the Century magazine, which remains one of the most comprehensive records available. There were no white survivors of Custer's battle. Therefore, all available information is derived from Native American accounts. This narrative, in particular, comes entirely from the Northern Cheyennes. Many of these informants are still alive, and their testimonies consist of numerous individual perspectives, making it challenging to form a complete overview of the conflict. In 1875, Sitting Bull took part in a medicine lodge held on the Tongue River. White Bull, also known as Ice Bear, was present and later recounted what transpired. Sitting Bull claimed to have had a vision and proclaimed to the assembled people that the great power had revealed his enemies would be delivered into his hands. He admitted to not knowing exactly who these enemies were, but speculated that they could be soldiers. In the spring of 1876, the Sioux and Northern Cheyennes gathered near the mouth of the Rosebud River, close to the Yellowstone River, forming a large encampment. Word spread within the camp that white soldiers were somewhere in the area, though their exact whereabouts were uncertain. In March, amidst freezing cold weather, General Reynolds launched an attack on a camp along Powder River that was inhabited by the Sioux and Cheyennes. No reported casualties occurred among the Indians, though the troops experienced some losses and captured the entire herd of Indian horses. For reasons unknown, the troops soon retreated, and the Indians pursued, eventually reclaiming most of the horses. From the mouth of the Rosebud River, the tribes advanced upstream and then made their way to the head of Reno Creek, always maintaining scouts to keep watch for enemies. After the men departed from the camp on the head of Reno Creek to engage Crook in the Battle of the Rosebud, the villages moved a short distance down Reno Creek towards the Little Bighorn River. They stayed there for 2 nights before relocating to the mouth of Reno Creek, where they camped for 5 or 6 days. During this time, 7 Arapahoes arrived at the camp. The Cheyennes and Sioux suspected these men to be scouts from a soldier camp, so they seized their weapons, horses, and some of their clothing, and there was a strong inclination to kill them. 2 Cheyennes, Black Wolf and Last Bull, spoke out, urging the people to refrain from acting hastily and to wait. The Arapahoes were escorted to the lodge of Old Two Moon, which was heavily guarded. While they were there, numerous Sioux approached with cocked guns and demanded they must be killed. Women whose family members had been slain voiced calls for the death of the Arapahoes. However, most of the people insisted, "This is Two Moon's lodge. We must wait until he comes. He shall decide." A young man was sent to search for Two Moon, who was eventually found in a Sioux camp. Meanwhile, the Arapaho chief was taken into the lodge. When Two Moon returned with 5 or 6 Sioux chiefs, they convened with the Arapahoes inside the lodge to deliberate on their fate. Following a conversation, Two Moon called out, "These Arapahoes are all right. They have come here to help us fight the soldiers. Do not harm them, but give them back their property." The Sioux chiefs echoed this sentiment, and soon the Arapahoes' horses, weapons, and clothing were returned to them. Some of the elders suggested inviting these guests to different lodges and offering them food. The day prior to Custer's attack, the tribes relocated and set up camp in the vast bottomland of the Little Bighorn, the site where the battle would soon unfold. There was a general sense among the people that an attack was imminent, though no concrete details were known. On the morning of the battle itself, 2 young men ventured out to fish along the Little Bighorn River. Accompanying them was a young boy who periodically wandered up to higher ground away from the water to catch grasshoppers for bait. On his final trip back, he told his uncle, White Shield, "I saw someone wearing a war bonnet pass by. They must be searching for someone." White Shield rode to the top of the hill and saw distant gunfire and people scattering. Realizing the camp was under attack, he raced back to warn the others. There are detailed records of the 7th Cavalry leading up to the point when the command split. Custer directed Reno to attack the upper end of the camp while he maneuvered to strike from below. Cheyenne and Sioux scouts, tasked with observing Crook's troops, noticed that Crook's forces had moved southward. On their way back to camp, these scouts also spotted Custer's troops advancing along the Rosebud River. Shortly after this discovery was reported in the camp, a few Sioux lodges, 4 or 5, rushed in. The people in these lodges had initially set out for the Red Cloud Agency, but quickly returned, frightened, after encountering Custer's force nearby. Their alarming report spread unease throughout the camp. Along Reno Creek, 2 men wounded during the battle with Crook on the Rosebud had succumbed to their injuries and were left behind in lodges. When Custer's troops came across these lodges, they charged but found no survivors. News of the troops' division at Reno Creek was already circulating within the camp. An elder warned that soldiers were preparing to attack from both the upper and lower ends. At this announcement, many began readying for battle and mounting their horses, though numerous horses were away with the herd, leaving many warriors on foot. Reno's unit was seen approaching the upper Indian camp, prompting most men to head there to confront him. Reno's forces charged down into a flat area with timber near the upper end of the Sioux village, but then halted, appearing to be in great disarray before retreating to the timber. The troops, after a brief pause among the trees, suddenly rushed out and began retreating, seemingly led by their commander. According to the Indians, their behavior suggested a loss of control, possibly caused by panic. In any case, they quickly bolted out of the timberline, charging back through the midst of the Indians to cross the stream and gain higher ground on the opposite side. Rather than retracing their initial path, they leapt over a bank in their haste. Cheyenne testimonies consistently indicate that the troops made no effort to defend themselves, focusing solely on escaping. The Indians closed in, knocking some of the soldiers from their horses as they fled, while others fell off while crossing the river. It was like chasing buffalo, a tremendous chase. We could never understand why the soldiers abandoned the timber, as staying would have made it impossible for the Indians to kill them. The troops successfully crossed the river and climbed up the hill. At nearly the same time, the Indians noticed a large pack train of mules heading directly to Reno. All the Indians halted at the river. They did not pursue the troops further, but instead turned back to examine the fallen, checking for their own losses and gathering spoils. While occupied with this, they heard gunfire and shouting farther down the river, a voice calling out that troops were attacking the lower end of the village. Immediately, they rushed down to witness Custer descending the hill, nearly reaching the river. Women and children from the lower villages, alarmed by the sound of gunfire coming from above, decided to flee by crossing the river to the north in hopes of distancing themselves from the Reno fight. While some were in the midst of crossing and others, having already crossed, were ascending a hill, they spotted more troops approaching, Custer's forces. The women, in a panic, turned back, ran through the other side of the village, and moved toward the bluffs southeast of the river. By this point, the men engaged in combat with Reno realized reinforcements were arriving, prompting all of them to rush down the creek toward the lower camps. Brave Wolf recounted that by then, a segment of Custer's troops had moved toward the mouth of a small, dry creek, nearly reaching the flat river bottom. There, a battle ensued, with both sides fiercely holding their ground along the river for quite some time. When White Shield, hastily returning from a fishing trip, made it back to the camp, he found his mother ready with his horse. As he prepared himself, he noticed 7 groups of Custer's troops advancing toward the river. Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, already aware of the approaching soldiers, began crossing the river at the ford to confront them. White Shield caught up with a group of 4 Cheyennes, including Rowan Bear, Bobtail Horse, and Calf. Riding with White Shield was Mad Wolf, also known as Mad-Hearted Wolf, sometimes called Rabid Wolf, which meant wolf that has no sense. He was renowned as one of the bravest and most insightful men in their tribe. While riding, he cautioned White Shield, saying, "No one must charge the soldiers now. They are too many." As the Cheyennes approached the troops from the river's edge, they saw the soldiers chasing 5 Sioux warriors. Gradually, they veered away from the troops' front, and the soldiers did not pursue them further, but instead continued toward the river. Custer's troops appeared to be making their way toward the ford, approximately half a mile upstream from the main battlefield, seemingly intending to enter the camp. Just as they drew near, the Gray Horse Company suddenly stopped and dismounted, followed by the rest of the troops within view, who did the same. White Shield veered off to the left and followed the river's course, while Bobtail Horse, Calf, and the few warriors accompanying them positioned themselves close to the riverbank. Hidden behind a low ridge, they began firing upon the soldiers. Among these warriors was the Oglala Sioux fighter, White Cow Bull. Soon, the 5 Sioux, whom the soldiers had initially been chasing, joined forces with Calf and Bobtail Horse. Together, the 10 warriors unleashed a continuous barrage at the soldiers. As the soldiers came to a halt, one of them was killed. At this point, more Sioux and Cheyennes converged, crossing the river and streaming up the gulch like ants emerging from a disturbed hill. The 2 nearest cavalry troops to Bobtail Horse's group retreated to a small knoll and paused their advance. Yellow Nose then made a daring solo charge toward them. The 2 cavalry troops lingered only briefly before retreating, crossing a deep gulch and scaling a nearby hill, moving toward what is now the site of the monument. During this retreat, some soldiers were killed, but the intense gunfire from the Gray Horse Company forced the warriors to fall back. Several courageous Cheyenne warriors, including Yellow Nose, Contrary Belly, and Chief Comes in Sight, launched close-range charges against the soldiers, which caused great panic among the troop horses tethered behind the lines. These horses struggled and circled wildly, adding to the chaos. At that moment, an order rippled along the Indian lines for the warriors to dismount, prompting the Cheyennes to unleash a rapid volley of shots. Far to the southeast, 2 men charged forward, followed by many Indian warriors. Yellow Nose seized a company guidon from where it had been planted, and as he carried it away, struck a soldier to count coup. The charge sent the terrified horses of this company fleeing from their handlers, causing them to stampede. Some Indians shouted, "The soldiers are running," though this was not the case. By this point, all the soldiers had retreated from the river's edge, except for the Gray Horse Company, which held its position where the monument stands today. On higher ground, various groups of soldiers shifted about, some heading towards the river while others moved away. When the Indians attacked from all directions, the soldiers closed ranks. At this time, 3 of the troops had lost their horses, but 4 still retained theirs. One dismounted group, situated near where the road now runs, attempted to make their way towards the Gray Horse Company, stationed on a hill about half a mile away. Many of the men were unarmed and had only 6 shooters, engaging in fierce, close combat as they climbed the hill. The men did not reach the hilltop. Every ravine descending from the northwest side of the ridge, every small cluster of brush, was occupied by Indians who maintained a relentless and punishing fire. The overwhelming number of Indians caused heavy casualties among the soldiers. By this time, many of the Indians were equipped with improved firearms. During the Crook Fight, Battle of the Rosebud, they had seized carbines from the troops and were continually acquiring more weapons, finding that the saddlebags of captured horses contained ample ammunition. White Bull, also known as Ice Bear, noted, "If it had not been for this, they could not have killed them so quickly." When the battle commenced, roughly half of the Indians had guns, while the rest carried bows, which they had in abundance. Their firearms varied widely, including muzzle loaders, Spencer carbines, Old Henry rifles, and Sharps military rifles. Among these, the Sharps rifles were likely their best weapons, apart from those recently captured from the soldiers. White Shield recounts that the Gray Horse Company held on to their horses until the very end, with nearly all of them being killed. Conversely, Bobtail Horse states that some of their horses managed to escape from the soldiers, charging down through the ranks of the Indians, knocking people over as they went. Bobtail Horse managed to capture 2 of these horses and brought them across the river to the camp, where the women had already returned. Shortly after the 3 companies reached the Gray Horse Company, a man on a sorrel horse broke away from the soldiers and rode up the river towards the hills, heading back in the direction from which the soldiers had originally come. Several Indians gave chase, but the rider's horse was both swift and enduring, leaving only 3 men still in pursuit by the end. A Sioux and 2 Cheyenne warriors, Old Bear and Kills in the Night, both of whom were still alive in 1915, continued their chase, determined to catch him. The Sioux fired but missed, followed by Old Bear, whose shot caused the man to eventually fall from his horse. When they reached him, they discovered he had been shot in the back, between the shoulders. It is widely believed that Old Bear was the one who killed him. Speculation suggests that this man was Lieutenant Harrington, as his body was never conclusively identified. Some Native Americans believed that one man on the edge of the Gray Horse Company near the river was General Custer. White Shield observed this individual while he was being stripped of his clothing. The man wore a fringed buckskin shirt and matching trousers, high-quality boots, and carried a knife in a scabbard tucked into one of his boots. A large red handkerchief was tied around his neck. He was equipped with a six-shooter and a long knife and died with his pistol still in hand. He had a mustache but was otherwise clean-shaven, and there were blue tattoos on his arms above the wrists. It was likely that this man was Tom Custer. According to the Native Americans, they did not defeat the troops through a direct charge, but by shooting at them from behind hills. The final charge was made only after the main body of soldiers had fallen, although some were still scattered on foot toward the river. Once all troops on the hill were down, the Native Americans gave a victorious shout and advanced up the ridge. The soldiers who were near the river retreated, and the remainder of the battle concluded quickly. After the battle ended, women and children entered the battleground, as was customary, and there was mutilation of the dead. Spotted Hawk, then a 7-year-old, recalled going with a group of slightly older children to take items from the fallen soldiers. They tried to remove clothing, cutting the waistbands to take off trousers. While doing so, a child cut open a waistband and discovered pieces of green paper, both small and large, which were likely fractional currency and larger bills. Intrigued by the colorful papers and unaware of their value, the children believed the hidden items must be important and took them back to camp. Spotted Hawk reminisced about using a folded bill as a saddle blanket while playing with clay figures, fashioning a clay horse and rider. After the Custer command was completely destroyed, the warriors regrouped and moved up the river to launch another assault on Reno's forces, which included Captain Benteen's men and the pack train. General Godfrey later provided a detailed account of these events in Century magazine, which remains one of the most comprehensive descriptions of the battle. That afternoon, 13 members of Reno's group, 12 soldiers and 1 civilian scout, who had been sheltering in the timber, managed to rejoin the main force. Among them was George Herondine. Meanwhile, Lieutenant DeRudio, enlisted man Tom O'Neill, also known as Tom O'Neill, William Jackson, and Fred Gerard, sometimes listed as Fred Gerard, stayed behind, hidden within the timber. Although the indigenous warriors were aware of the group's presence, they primarily focused their attacks on the troops entrenched on the hill, maintaining a continuous barrage of gunfire. The morning following the Custer engagement, the indigenous fighters remained vigilant around Reno's forces. At this point, the besieged troops were in desperate need of water. According to indigenous accounts, one soldier, clad only in his undergarments, made a daring run down the hill to reach the river while being fired upon. He carried a quart cup in one hand and a canteen in the other. Once at the river, he lay in the water to fill both containers and drink. Despite bullets splashing water around him, he managed to return to the hill unharmed, re-entering the fortifications. The indigenous forces maintained their presence throughout the day, launching several assaults. However, reports from their scouts soon alerted them to the imminent approach of Terry's forces. As a result, orders were issued for the camp to relocate, and the women quickly began packing. Among Reno's scouts who perished was Bloody Knife, a prominent Ree who had been raised among the Sioux due to his father's marriage to a Ree woman during a period of peace. As a boy, Bloody Knife's mother longed to return to her people, and the family moved back to the Ree village along the Missouri River. From that point on, he lived as a Ree and was highly regarded. In 1874, he joined Custer's expedition to the Black Hills of Dakota, where he served as an effective scout. During Reno's retreat across the Little Bighorn River, Bloody Knife was killed. Later, 2 young women, daughters of Bloody Knife's Sioux sister, came down from the Sioux and Cheyenne camp to collect war trophies. They discovered an Indian scout, and recognizing his allegiance from his clothing, decapitated him, mounted his head on a pole, and carried it back to their camp. Their mother, seeing the trophy, realized it was her brother, Bloody Knife. Sometime afterward, Major DeRudio recounted the experiences of the 4 men left behind in the timber in Harper's Weekly. As Reno's forces retreated across the river to the hill, the 4 men became separated. DeRudio and O'Neill stuck together, while Jackson and Girard formed another pair. In their struggle, DeRudio and O'Neill unexpectedly encountered and killed several indigenous warriors passing through the timber. Eventually, all 4 men reunited with Reno's command on the hill. The Indian community attacked by Custer's command was notably large, though the exact size remains uncertain. Young Tu Moon once told me there were around 200 lodges in the Cheyenne village and 6 Sioux villages, each larger than the Cheyennes. Assuming the Sioux villages were of comparable size, that would amount to roughly 1,400 lodges. Beyond those living in these lodges, numerous visitors, Indians from different reservations, also gathered here, though their numbers remain unknown. In the spring, the Sioux and Cheyennes dispatched runners to Red Cloud, Spotted Tail, Standing Rock, and other Sioux reservations, summoning warriors to join the camp. The call was met with a strong response. Among those gathered were Southern Cheyennes, Yankton Sioux, and Arapahoes. Many of these people stayed as guests within the lodges, while others camped in makeshift shelters outside. Cheyenne accounts suggest there were over 1,500 lodges, each potentially sheltering 3 to 4 fighting men, totaling anywhere from 4,500 to 6,000 warriors. Eastman's record offers a different view, reporting slightly over 900 lodges and roughly 1,400 warriors, a stark contrast that may be too conservative, just as the Cheyenne estimation might be overly generous. However, Northern Cheyenne testimony consistently supports the existence of 200 Cheyenne lodges, whereas Eastman lists just 55. His tally of the Sioux may be more accurate. One thing remains evident. If Reno and Custer had maintained their advance, charging from both ends of the village, the Indians would have scattered, preventing disaster. Over the years, Northern Cheyennes have repeatedly shared their perspective on the Custer fight, asserting that if Reno had stayed in the timber, the Indians would have been unable to confront him effectively. Furthermore, they believed that had Custer persisted in his charge through the villages, the Indians would have fled, resulting in significant casualties. If the soldiers had not stopped, they would have killed lots of Indians, remarked one prominent warrior. Those familiar with Indian combat tactics know that generally, Indians preferred to avoid close engagements. When their enemy charged, they retreated. However, the moment their opponent's momentum weakened or ceased, they would rally, turn around, and launch a countercharge. This pattern typified old intertribal conflicts, often characterized by alternating advances and retreats by both sides. Many individuals have examined the battleground, yet the exact details of the fight remain unclear. Nonetheless, evidence suggests that a portion of Custer's command approached the ford. If the 2 companies that reached this point, likely including Lieutenants Crittenden and Calhoun, had continued to cross the river, it is highly probable that the remainder of the command would have followed, potentially leading to a decisive victory. It appears that Custer aimed to launch a dual-sided assault on the camp. The strategy itself was sound, but demanded precise timing and fearless leadership. Either Reno initiated his charge prematurely, or Custer's journey took considerably longer than anticipated to reach his position. While Reno's path spanned merely 3 miles, Custer's distance extended 6, 7, or possibly 10 miles. By the time Custer neared the river, Reno had already suffered defeat and retreated to his hill. It is conceivable that Custer paused atop the hill to search for Reno, inadvertently granting the Indian forces time to consolidate. This delay might have led Custer to believe that the opposition he faced was insurmountable. However, according to the Cheyennes, initially only 10 warriors were present at the ford to counter any attempted charge. The chosen site of the monument offers a strong defensive position, but the ridge's borders are carved with numerous small ravines and gullies, providing excellent cover for the Indians' approach. Assuming Custer was unable or unwilling to cross the river and storm the camp, a superior defensive maneuver would have been to descend to the river bottom's flat ground. There, a disciplined force, led by competent officers and maintaining composure, could have outlasted the Indians, who likely would have withdrawn after prolonged fighting. If Custer had continued moving and either crossed the river at the ford, near the dry gulch that Crittenden and Calhoun were seemingly heading toward when killed, or moved further downstream, crossed, and returned along the flat, it seems plausible the Indians would have fled. Had Crittenden and Calhoun's companies succeeded in crossing and guided Custer forward, the day's outcome might have been dramatically different. The events of June 25, 1876, at the Battle of the Little Bighorn have been analyzed and debated for generations, offering a window into the turbulent clash of cultures on the American frontier. Custer's defeat, influenced by complex strategies, delayed actions, and fierce Native American resistance, underscored the resilience of the Sioux and Cheyenne in defending their land and way of life. While some believe the battle could have ended differently with slight changes in tactics, its legacy serves as a stark reminder of the devastating costs of conflict and the fierce determination of a people fighting for their survival. The stories and testimonies from both sides paint a vivid, haunting picture of bravery, miscalculation, and the harsh realities of war.